Hello, everyone. I have a very special guest on the Humanist Report podcast, the very first presidential candidate that decided to come on the Humanist Report. I think you all know who this is by now. His name is Andrew Yang. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I've got to say this. You have been very attentive to the importance of going on indie media news shows, so you get extra credit for that because I think that it really is important for you to come on these shows that are smaller because you really do get to talk directly to the grassroots. So I admire that. Now, out of all the 2020 candidates, I think you probably have the most robust platform out of everyone, but you are basically known as the UBI guy. When we think Andrew Yang, we think about universal basic income, and I do want to talk to you about that. However, I actually want to start with some different policy positions that we haven't necessarily heard as much from you on. So the first one is, when you go to your website, there are three key policy planks. So the first one, of course, is UBI. The second is Medicare for All, and the other is human-centered capitalism, which I guess is more of a philosophy, but I still think that that's pretty helpful because it kind of gives us a sense of what you believe in. Now, going to Medicare for All, when I click on Medicare for All, what you seem to be describing is more of a public option. And at the CNN town hall you did, somebody asked you about healthcare, and you said that you're firmly in the camp of Medicare for All / public option. But my question to you is, these are two very different programs. So which one is it? Which do you actually want to implement as president?
Yeah, so if I understand, first let me say I love podcasts. I love independent media, and you all gave me my chance, really, because when I was running in 2018, certainly no cable news outlet wanted to have Andrew Yang on.
Yeah. And now look at you.
And now they can't get enough of me. I think that these conversations are a much better way to introduce yourself to voters than a cable news appearance that consists of rapid fire. 6
Absolutely. You can't get really nuanced discussions about the policy details on mainstream news. So I think this is a great way to do that.
Yeah, and the format is much better. I prefer it on several levels,
Yeah.
And love the work that you personally do. I mean, when I saw your array of policy positions, I was like, wow, I agree with virtually all of these, and I supported Bernie last time as well. It seems like you were asking about Medicare for All versus like single payer was the sense that I'm getting from your question.
Well, I'm asking if you support single payer versus public option. Sorry, I was kind of getting a little bit of an echo.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought. And, it was really interesting because in my book, it's like I was a little bit ambiguous in terms of those two things as well. But I've come to believe that that a public option would be better and also would enable a better transition. And the goal is to make it, frankly, such that most private insurance has no place in the market and that you get rid of it. With the save for perhaps a few super gold-plated concierge things that might not be a bad thing for the American people, because if some really rich people are spending lots of money on esoteric treatments, then we can benefit from that research and the money. So at this point, the plan that I saw that I've now gotten on board with has been bringing down the Medicare eligibility age over time as a phased rollout, and then make it so that all Americans become eligible for that. Try and get the prices down and the access up, and then essentially squeeze out the private insurers out of the marketplace and demonstrate. Because most consumers, if you tell me, hey, I've got this low cost quality public option, I'm going to embrace that. I'm going to jump on that. And you can make that happen, I think, much more expediently than if you were to make private insurance illegal.
So you actually do want to make public insurance illegal. That's the long-term goal.
I want to make it so that private insurance is irrelevant for 95% plus of Americans, that we're all perfectly happy showing up to our medical healthcare provider and saying, hey, I'm Andrew, I'm here, I've got the plan everyone has.
Right.
And then And my parents actually have experienced this. They were blown away. My parents are immigrants from Taiwan, and they've been living in Taiwan for the last number of years. And they've been blown away by the disparities between that healthcare system where they just show up, they get what they need done, they pay $20 out of pocket, and then they go home and are like, that was it? Like, I didn't have any crazy forms or like third party and none of that. And they come back to the US, and then all of a sudden it's back into the maze, the high cost maze.
Right. Okay, so let me ask you this. Since your goal is to make private health insurance companies irrelevant, even though it's obvious that if you do have a public option, they'd be forced to compete, and a lot of people would probably opt for the government-run plan because it would be more cost-efficient, it would provide more robust benefits. But if your goal ultimately is to do away with private insurance companies, why not just go the extra step and opt for Medicare for all, especially if you become president, because this is what I'm visualizing. Let's say President Andrew Yang is proposing a new healthcare reform policy. If you start with public option, Republicans are going to negotiate you down from that initial position. So if your goal actually is public option, why not start with strength and say, we're going to do Medicare for all, and then if you get negotiated down to a public option, then you still come out on top. Why not opt for the more robust comprehensive plan? Because the real key difference here is Medicare for all would make healthcare free at the point of service. And if you want to actually do away with private insurance companies, there's no better way to do that really than just implementing Medicare for all full stop.
And
so
to
why
do away
not?
with private companies.
Exactly. So why not do that full stop?
I like your negotiating approach.
I'm very much a purist on Medicare for all.
No, I think anchoring them high is a very good first step. If you said right now, hey Andrew, your choice is Medicare for all, single payer, get rid of private insurance, or our current plan, I would say we should definitely go to single payer like yesterday. That the question really is what the path and what the transition looks like. And I think that the transition would be marginally better if we weren't putting all these private insurance companies out of business on the same day.
Well, to be clear, the Medicare for all proposals in the House and Senate, they actually have a 4-year transition period. The Senate version has 4 years and the House version has 2 years. So it wouldn't necessarily be an overnight transition. Just to be
or even phased out. I mean, but they'd still theoretically all go out of business on the same day 4 years from now, and so I'm not against your suggestion. Like, I think philosophically, you and I are aligned on the goal and the vision. I mean, the vision is in the richest, most advanced economy in the world. Why are we all going broke on our health care? Right. Why are these prices so ridiculous and opaque? Why are we more stressed out if we get sick or injured about paying for treatment than we are actually getting well or caring for our loved ones? And I'm for any path that gets us there. If I believe that we can make single payer happen and that transition is superior, I'd be happy to start with that.
Well, and let me just make one last pitch for Medicare for all to you, not to beat a dead horse. But currently, Medicare for all is polling at 70+% among the general population, over 80% among Democrats, and 51% among Republicans. Now, when you poll them on a public option, it still is popular, but currently, Medicare for all has name recognition, and I think this is why you're seeing other presidential candidates. They're taking a public option, and they're attaching that Medicare name for it. So, for example, Pete Buttigieg has Medicare for all who want it. Beto O'Rourke has Medicare for America, and you have Medicare for all. So I think that there is that popularity that you can sell to the American public. So that's just one last thing that I'll say. So let me tell you this, as a Medicare for all purist, I hope that we'll see a President Yang push relentlessly for Medicare for all, because if you really want to do away with the health insurance companies, there's no better way to do that than Medicare for all. But I do want to move on to another policy. One thing that I wanted a clarification from you on was your stance on the minimum wage, because I'm unclear if you are against the minimum wage full stop or if you simply are against an increase in the federal minimum wage.
Now, I'm for the fundamental premise that no one should be working anywhere close to full time and not being able to make ends meet or live a good life, even a good, what we'd consider middle class life. And we're paying poverty wages in many, many jobs and circumstances around the country. And so that I'm for universal basic income of $1,000 a month, which would have the benefit of both being an effective raise of approximately $6 and change for people who are working, close to full time, and would also start to compensate parents and caregivers and people who are doing work that right now the market values at zero, which is obviously wrong and perverse. And I like to bring up my wife, who's at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic, and how the market values her work at zero, which is wrong, and a universal basic income would help with that. So no one should be working and be poor. And if we put $1,000 a month into people's hands, it would be an effective raise that would give the majority of workers in this country an effective minimum wage with the existing minimum wage plus the universal basic income of, let's call it like 13 to 14 bucks an hour in most locations. So I'm not for doing anything with the minimum wage. If you ask me right now, in the absence of universal basic income, should we look to raise the minimum wage? I would agree with that. I think that a universal basic income is a more effective way to do this, in part because there are some employers that are on like the margins. Let's call it like a local hardware store that's like just trying to make ends meet because, Amazon's like stealing their lunch. And then you say, hey guys, it's $15 an hour time, and they're paying their employees like, $9 or $10. And then if you increase their costs, will they maybe cut shifts back for some of the people that work in that store? Will they, maybe at the margins so there's marginal situations where we'd be much better off just putting the money directly into the workers' hands from the top down as just a matter of citizenship, rather than saying to the business, hey, struggling hardware store, pay that person more.
But don't you think the same can be true about your universal basic income program? Because if a business owner is going to increase the prices, for example, if minimum wage goes up, then wouldn't they also be inclined to decrease wages if they have universal basic income? Because if they don't necessarily have to pay, if they're not obligated by government to pay a minimum wage, then wouldn't they just pay their workers $1 an hour knowing that they get universal basic income? And this kind of goes into UBI and some of the questions I wanted to ask, because what happens, hypothetically speaking, you become president and we actually get UBI codified into law 30 years down the road, which would be it'd be phenomenal for a lot of people. But let's say 30 years down the road, after having universal basic income, the cost of living increases, rent goes up, inflation increases. Would we still be sitting at 1,000? Would we adjust that over time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's adjusted to CPI, or core inflation of various consumer goods. So to your point, I would not be for, and most minimum wage laws are on the state books anyway. So I would not be for certainly reducing existing minimum wage laws. If anything, if there's a direction they should go, it's up.
Okay.
But it'd be impossible to get anyone to work for $1 an hour anyway, because if you're getting $1,000 a month and I say, hey, good news, I'm going to try and pay you $8 a day, no one would show up for that job. Because the great thing about the universal basic income is it actually makes it much harder to push around and exploit workers. Because right now you've got a worker who's literally relying upon you just to make ends meet. And then if you knew that you could make ends meet independent of the job, in some cases, the compensation might actually have to go up, not down. Mm-hmm. Because if it's some job that people really detest, they'd be like, if you really want me to show up for this thing, you're going to have to pay a little bit more, because now I don't need the job to survive.
Right. Okay, that actually does make sense. It kind of gives workers more leverage, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it makes it harder to exploit us. And this is true particularly for women, for people in the LGBTQ community who are more likely to be fired from jobs for their identity and be persecuted. It gives everyone more bargaining power and mobility, where there are hundreds of thousands of women, I'm sure, in this country right now who are stuck in exploitative or abusive jobs because, they need that waitressing job to make ends meet for their kid. And then if their boss is a jerk and harasses them, they just have to suck it up. It's there are all of these terrible relationships and jobs right now that people feel stuck in because they feel like they don't have the security to walk away.
Right. No, and that's a great point. And one thing that I wanted to ask you about with regard to UBI was the structure of UBI, because as I initially understood it, which it seems incorrect, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a universal program. However, the caveat is that it's opt-in. So to kind of tie this to a real world example so I can kind of get a better grasp of how it would work in reality. My dad, for example, he receives Social Security insurance every single month of $1,300 per month. So with your proposal, he would have to choose between UBI and Social Security insurance. So my question then becomes, if he has to pick between these, and obviously he's going to opt for the $1,300 option because, basic math, it's more money.
It's higher.
Then, exactly, it's higher, so it makes more sense for him to do that. But effectively, he would not be getting an extra $1,000 because with my parents, they live paycheck to paycheck. They wait for that $1,300 check every single month. But if you increased them and supplemented what they already got, give them an extra $1,000, that would radically change their lives. But they'd have to opt in to UBI and they wouldn't get that additionally. Meanwhile, someone who makes $100,000 per year, who's firmly in the middle class, they'd get the extra $1,000. So even if I like that you're pitching this as a universal program, don't you think that opt-in caveat kind of undermines the universality of it?
Well, the $1,300 that your father receives, is that for both him and your mother? Are they both in the same household?
So I believe my father receives $1,300 and my mom gets $400 or something along those lines.
Yeah. So, and this is not an atypical situation, and it's why I ask, is that for your parents, your mom would also be entitled to the freedom dividend, and so she looks at her $400, and this is not unusual because a lot of women went years without developing work histories, often because they're raising kids, and then their Social Security benefits are much lower, and so your parents' net benefit would be $600 because your dad's like, hey, I'm getting $1,300, so pass in the freedom dividend, and your mom's like, ooh, freedom dividend,
Right.
and then, the extra 600 would be really significant for household on a fixed income. And so it is true that certain people who are in existing programs might benefit a bit less, though, as you know, $600 on top of the $1,700 they're currently getting would be like a huge relief. I mean, that would be, like maybe a 33% increase. So it might not sound like, ooh, $600 a month, who cares? But that's actually like really significant if you're operating on a fixed income.
It would be substantial. But and so technically, if you're looking at couples, then they would technically get $2,000 per month. But that still begs the question: why would someone, for example, on Social Security disability have to choose? Why would they not get as much as someone who's making $100,000 per year? Do you kind of see? So there's just a disconnect, and I'm hoping that you can fill me in on that if I'm genuinely misunderstanding.
No. Well, your understanding of it is correct. So there are some problems that the freedom dividend is well designed to solve, and then some that it is less well designed to solve. Honestly, like it's very well designed to help empower millions of American workers and people in tough situations. It will make children and families stronger. It will improve our health, nutrition, mental health, relationships. It'll make workers tougher to exploit. Does it do as much for someone who's already receiving Social Security and other benefits? It does not do as much for those households. And to me, that's like a separate problem that we have to tackle and solve, which is that Social Security is supposed to go insolvent in, I think it's 18 years or something. To
be clear, just so people know, it actually rolls over. So for example, it's scheduled to go insolvent in 2038, for example, but then next year it'll be scheduled to go insolvent in 2039, and then it just starts paying out 80% in the event it still isn't fully solvent. But I do agree with that there needs to be something. I think lifting the cap on Social Security is a really good solution. Is that something that you'd support?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
There's like an unrelated crisis. It's related but unrelated. So we have tens of millions of aging Americans who do not have adequate retirement savings.
Right.
And we're about to be a society where you're seeing old people working until the day they die and dying on the street and living under bridges, all sorts of incredibly horrific things where, again, if we're the richest and most advanced society in the history of the world, that's unacceptable, and we should make big moves to address that. And the freedom dividend would help some of those situations because it's very common, like your parents, where you have two people who are receiving together jointly less than $2,000. But the freedom dividend is not actually designed to solve that problem as much as it's designed to solve other situations and problems. Do I agree that this retirement savings crisis and the home healthcare crisis and all of these need to have massive resources put to work? Yeah, 100%. And if you were to say, hey, the freedom dividend does not address that as effectively as it addresses other situations, I would agree with that as well.
Okay, that's certainly fair, and thank you for clarifying, because that is something that I wanted to kind of clear up some confusion, because initially I assumed that UBI would supplement our existing social safety net programs, but what you're kind of pitching it as is something that is either or. You can choose between, for example, food stamps or UBI. Now, let me ask you this, because in a way, you're calling it the freedom dividend, so that gives individuals hypothetically more freedom. But here's what I worry about, and I'm not saying that this is something that you're proposing, but this is what I'm worried about post-Yang presidency. We pass UBI. You served 2 terms. You've been president now. But we have a Republican administration. And what they tend to do is they pitch the idea of freedom, but oftentimes it's a Trojan horse to privatize social safety net programs. So let me give you an example. So Republicans often talk about voucher programs. They do like to do that. They talk about voucher programs for healthcare, for education. Now, what is this in actuality? It's a ploy to privatize it, because if you devalue the utility of these types of social safety net programs, what happens? You open the door to privatization, because that undermines public support. And so here's what I worry about. If we get UBI and that kind of becomes the standard, it replaces food stamps for the most part. How can we protect what exists for the social safety net alongside UBI if people still opt for welfare instead of UBI simply because it benefits them more? Like, for example, my dad, it just benefits him to get, the $1,300 from Social Security. So how can we protect Social Security if it's devalued because of UBI?
This is a very legitimate and important consideration. And one of the things that I've said to folks is that on the bright side, because people, very understandably, it's like, look, conservatives love to try and chop away at these programs, and might having the freedom dividend make it easier for them to do so. And then there is a contrary point of view that that this freedom dividend could itself become sort of like a tree trunk where you can't chop it because everyone's getting it, and then you're like, okay, well, it's sort of hard to attack it. And the Alaska example is instructive, where they've had it for almost 40 years, and it's so popular, you can't touch it. And so there is a trade-off. First, as you I think can tell, I would be the last person who wants to take away social programs from anyone, and certainly you're right that it's possible that the president after me is then let me see if I can
right, because you can't be president forever, so that's what I'm worried about is future administrations.
Yeah, it's a legitimate concern. The thing that I'd suggested to people is that you have to take a look at our current situation, which is that I'm not sure how hatchet-proof our existing programs are right now. The conservatives have already successfully pulled back benefits in various states and various environments.
That's true.
And so it's not right now, in the absence of the freedom dividend, these programs are bulletproof. A lot of people are actually very concerned about these programs' future. And the fear I have, if you look into what I think is coming with this wave of automation, is that the thing that's driving the hatcheting away of various welfare programs is this mindset of scarcity that is predominant. And unfortunately, it's getting higher and stronger as financial insecurity sweeps the country, more or less. Where then if you have people who are struggling themselves economically, it's easier for conservative leaders to look at them and say, hey, guys, what's that? Yeah, we don't have enough money to go around. You know what we have to do? We have to get rid of these welfare programs for the people. Yeah. And then the people who are in scarcity are like, yeah, that's right. That's why things aren't good, is because we're wasting money on these other people. And that mindset is getting stronger and deeper and nastier all the time because we're pushing more and more Americans and communities into economic distress. Right. So in the post-freedom dividend world, where people don't feel like their very future and their kids' futures are in question, and then you get the economic boot off of people's throat, and they have a greater sense of abundance and future orientation, and maybe even lower stress levels, then it's going to be harder to gin them up to attack and hatchet welfare programs. Because if you go and say, hey, these people are getting this stuff, then they'll be like, who cares? Like my life is fine. My kids are fine. I'm getting stuff.
Exactly.
They're getting some more stuff. Like maybe that's fine too. Maybe they need it. Maybe, their circumstances are different than mine.
So if you have, because this is what concerns me the most, and I'm supportive of UBI, to be clear. So if you are also kind of concerned with the same thing of future administrations getting in and, using UBI to pitch cutting other social safety net programs, why not redesign your current UBI proposal to make it supplement existing social safety net programs? Because I think that would make everything, all of these problems that I'm bringing up kind of go away, because if it truly is universal, everybody gets it. Nobody's going to want to get rid of, in Congress is going to want to get rid of UBI if it's so popular. And additionally, if it supplements our existing social safety net programs, then they can no longer use UBI. Republicans can no longer say, well, you have UBI, so you don't need food stamps. Let's cut that. So why not supplement what already exists? Why make it either or?
I think part of it is that the way that the freedom dividend is positioned is that we're saying the right of citizenship now as an American is that you should be getting a floor of $1,000 a month. And that principle then, I believe, can make it very, very popular very quickly. And so if that's the principle, then you go to someone and say, hey, you may already be receiving benefits of a certain kind. We're guaranteeing you a floor of $1,000 a month, doesn't matter what your situation is. And so, like, in an ideal world, like if you gave me again a choice, it's like, hey, pass UBI on top of the existing social safety nets. Like, I would take that. But I believe that it's going to be more achievable. And again, we'd be talking about the alleviation of gross poverty in our time if we have it as like a blanket floor across the board. But like the question is a really interesting one. Mm-hmm. Like the way that I understood even the original basic income proposals, it was around this universal floor for everyone, and that's the approach that we've chosen.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I kind of want to move on. I want to get to some of your other policy proposals because you have really interesting and I think innovative ideas that nobody else is talking about. So you're proposing ranked choice voting, publicly financed elections, a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. One I really love, lowering the voting age to 16. Love it. You want to legalize marijuana. You want net neutrality. So these are all phenomenal proposals. However, there's one thing that makes me a little bit skeptical, and this is your provision to sunset all laws. So if you pass all of those really phenomenal ideas, then they'll automatically be sunsetted. So even if you pass UBI, you also have another proposal that sunsets it. So in 10 years, when the date comes up for it to be renewed, I mean, Republicans, they're not going to want to renew that. They didn't renew the Children's Health Insurance Program. So does this mean that you support all laws expiring? I mean, the Civil Rights Act, Social Security Act. Tell me more about that sunset provision, because that's the one thing that gives me pause, because you have great policies and I don't want them undermined by an automatic sunset clause.
Oh, yeah. And the sunset clause is really designed to just force our legislature to actually grapple with the laws that are on the books. Because right now, so it's not, like, to your point, certainly we can't have a society where like every law then gets called into question.
So it's specific laws.
I know the way, yes. And I know the way that it reads, it does suggest that we're like constantly reexamining. In a way, it's more of like a trying to take an inventory of what's on the books now, because we have, I believe it's tens of thousands of rules and regulations that at this point, if you were to go to anyone on Capitol Hill, like no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, that's true.
At this, because a lot of these things have been passed like years ago, and it's like no one's job really. And so, we were trying to come up with an effective way just to get people to re-examine what's on the books and then see like, hey, does this still make sense in 2019 or 2020? It is true that if you were to apply it to everything, it would become unmanageable. And so the point was really just to say, look, we need to actually reevaluate the laws that have been on the books for a certain period of time.
Okay. Do you have like an example of like a specific set of laws that this would be applicable to? Like, would it involve tax law or city? I mean, you can't really do city codes at the federal level, but can you just give me some examples as to what you're specifically intending to sunset, if it's not technically everything?
Thank you, and it's a great question. So when I was with some farmers in Iowa, they were talking about various arcane federal regulations that apply to the way that their crops are set up, or that the way that there's like when one of them said to me, it's like, look, the fact is, if you came and came to my farm, you could find a half dozen violations anytime you want, because they're like, he said that there are so many different rules that even if he were to try his best, that he'd be found in violation of a half a dozen any moment in time. And some of the ones he cited to me seemed like like they were more rules for rules' sake than that they were actually going to make his crops any safer or healthier. So it was like that was one example that hit my radar when I was in Iowa. There have been other like small businesses and proprietors who've said, it's like, look, the fact is that like I'm probably not keeping track of a lot of the rules that I'm accountable to, and I think that's really unhealthy for a society when you have people are trying to be responsible. Who, if you give them rules, they'll try and follow them. But at this point, our rules are so dense because we pass them and then we never unpass them, and then we just make new ones. And at some point, actually, that ends up eroding the importance and efficacy of the laws. I was influenced by an author, Philip Howard, who's a little bit more on the conservative end of the spectrum, but he calls it like the rule of nobody, where at this point, no one knows like what to do or what's in charge, and there's like this rule book, like a phone book thick, that could be brandished on you, and like we all live in fear of the phone book rule book.
Sure, no, it's yeah. Well, let me say this though. In the event you are a farmer and you're saying, look, President Yang, I have all of these regulations that I don't want to follow. How do you determine what actually is or is not legitimate? Because, for example, President Trump last year, he postponed water testing rules. And then we saw the direct result of what happened. We had a nationwide E. coli outbreak, and it was because of dirty water, because of the loosening of regulations. So how do you determine what concerns are legitimate and which ones are illegitimate? Like, are you going to set a type of commission of experts? Like, how do we determine, whose concerns are actually valid and how many people just want to skirt regulations to save a buck or two?
Yeah, and another excellent question. One of the things that made me sad is how the Republicans got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995, where they used to have an office to advise Congress on tech regulation, and they said, we're wasting money on this thing, so they got rid of it. And so that's exactly the kind of thing we need more of, not less of, where you actually have experts that are not subject to industry money or lobbying. And then just they can come and say, look, you know what would actually make our water safer and cleaner, or our crops safer for our people? It's like these things, and these things more marginal. And so your bilateral commission is exactly the kind of thing that we would want, taking a look at some of the regs. The OTA, which doesn't exist, but hopefully the Democrats are going to succeed in bringing it back, is exactly the kind of third-party objective advisory body that you would want to try and come in and take a look at what's on the books. And certainly I'd be the opposite of the guy who's like, hey, let's like ignore the water regs for a particular period of time. When I was in Ohio, someone just said to me offhandedly that their cancer rate is several times the national average because in that particular area, Northeast Ohio, because of the drinking water, and that what we think of as the Flint water crisis is actually endemic to dozens of communities around the country. And that, I mean, I don't know if people listening to this or watching this are shocked by that. I think I knew that. But then to actually be with someone who just offhandedly like knew that their cancer risk was going to be like several times the national average, that still struck me as very jarring, that they just sort of accept that risk every day. So certainly anything that actually hews to public safety, it's possible that we should be doing more of, not less. Like my ask of the legislature to evaluate laws is certainly not like an public protection. It's more like an efficiency and legislative accountability measure.
Okay, and that makes sense. So the website is yang2020.com. I know you've got a split, so let me give you the floor now to kind of just make your pitch to my viewers as to why they should support you, how they can get involved, and basically anything you want to say.
Well, thank you so much. First, I just want to appreciate you and the work that you do. You're such like a voice of clarity and reason.
Thank you. That means a lot.
And the fact that that you were such a champion of Bernie, and then now the cause, it really is the revolution that Bernie started, and certainly I'm very much aligned with Bernie Sanders on many of the goals that he's put out that have helped move our country in the right direction. I'm thrilled that you went through and dug up all the policies on the website, and I feel like some of them you feel like probably came out of your own brain. I felt that way when I was looking at your policy proposals, where I was like, ooh, I feel like you and I have had the same ideas about where our society should go for quite some time.
Yeah.
The main thing that I think I differ with from Senator Sanders really is really the solutions and the path forward. To me, the single most direct and concrete way we can improve our own lives and the lives of our fellow citizens is just to put cash in our hands. A lot of the things that we're talking about on the Democratic side are kind of circuitous ways to get there. It's like, how can I somehow get money into people's hands? Like, I'm going to reduce the cost of education, which I'm for. I want to try and get healthcare off of people's backs, which I'm for. But the fact is, our economy now is evolving in ways that's going to become more and more punitive and inhuman for more and more Americans, and those trends are accelerating. One of the things that does set me apart from other candidates is the fact that I've spent time in technology, and I know just how transformative AI is going to be. I mean, there are 2.5 million call center workers in the United States right now, and AI is going to get rid of a lot of them. Mm-hmm. Driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states. And AI is going to get rid of a lot of them. You don't really think of AI as self-driving trucks, but that's what it is.
Right.
It's AI. So we're already falling apart. Our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years because of suicides and drug overdoses. We have a mental health crisis in this country. We are heading in a very dangerous, desperate direction, and that's why Donald Trump's our president today. And the trends that are driving that are unfortunately about to pick up steam. Like, this is a time for very dramatic response and action. And that's what drove me to run for president. As you can tell, I'm not a career politician. I'm not someone who ever sat awake at night being like, ooh, like, I'd love to be president.
Which is refreshing, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And I'm on the record saying if someone else were to take all of these policy proposals and champion them and get them across the finish line, and it's not me, that would be great. That would be like, I mean, I'm ready to be president. I think I'd be an excellent one. But the goal here is just to solve the problems of the American people. Mm-hmm. And the best way we can solve the problems of the American people in the time frame we need to is just put $1,000 a month into our hands, and then that would more directly solve a lot of the problems we're talking about than anything else we can do. So that's the main thing that I think that differentiates me from some of the other people that are going to be on this program. I think we're very aligned in terms of our vision and values and goals for our society. We just have different approaches to get there. I believe that some of my approaches are going to be more modern and effective. But, that's for the American people to decide. I'm just grateful for this opportunity to be able to introduce myself to more Americans.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. I hope that we can do this again. And hey, good luck. I think that you are a really fascinating candidate. And unlike pretty much every other person, I get why you're running. Like, you have a specific reason why you're running. A lot of other people, they don't really seem to be pushing for policies. But when I look at your platform, it's beautiful. It's art. So thank you for actually having policies and not just platitudes. And thank you for coming on the program. It's been absolutely a blast. And I think this has been really helpful.
Well, me too. And hopefully we'll have a chance to meet in person soon.
Definitely.
I really congrats on the work you do. And, I'm very, very happy to come back anytime.
All right. Sounds good. Andrew Yang, yang2020.com.